I must tell you that I loved my years in school very, very much. And during my particular era in school, this was the only school that was available, the Washington School for the Deaf. And the public schools had nothing to offer, and if I had gone there, I'd been totally left out. There was no such thing as a sign language interpreter in those days. I'm very, very happy that I came to this school, Washington School for the Deaf. I think we're going to take a little pause right now.
Okay.
Is that it? In my time in school, we had LS and CE. And LS, we had it every day for 2 weeks. And it was kind of like a debate. And maybe a storytelling, maybe it could be a song. And also there was some performing, some stage performing. And that was always kind of fun. And I learned a great deal in these classes. And so we'd do this for 2 weeks, and then we'd go maybe talk about movies for 2 weeks and alternate the schedule. But this, on Sundays, we did CE every Sunday, and we always had to wear a suit on Sunday as well. We went to Sunday school. We had a Sunday school class, and when that was finished, then we would change into our regular clothes for the afternoon. We had free time. We could go downtown or something like that. And then in the evening meal, we had to put our suit back on to go to CE. And you what CE was. It means Christian education. It was like Bible stories and songs and that sort of thing. I think probably maybe it lasted less than an hour. And other activities we had were, we had like clubs in the school. There was a dance club, and so on. It seemed like there was always something to do to keep us busy while we were here in school. And every evening we always had a study hall time, and it began at 7 o'clock until 8. And we all had to line up and sit at our desks in rows and spend some time studying. And we had what you call the head teacher, and they always were seated a little in an elevated way so they could look over the entire room while we were supposed to be studying. And I remember one time we had one teacher. It was Mr. Devine, and there's also a man by the name of Devine now in school. But anyway, there was Devines, and he was always doing things for other teachers as well. And he always say, "What are you doing that for?" And he was very, very, very strict. And he was always making sure that we studied while we were here. So if you want to go to college, you have to study. And I think a lot of the kids went to college in those days because they studied hard. And he would walk by and he would look at what you were looking. And if you had a book that you're not supposed to be looking at, he'd take it away from you. And then I thought, well, if I tried to fingerspell to somebody, he'd come by and grab you by the hair or the head, and then he'd make you sit down. And he was strict. And then when 8 o'clock, then you could leave the classroom, and you'd learn your lesson if you got your hair pulled, and you would pay attention to your studies. And I think he was really very helpful keeping me on track. And I believe he died when I was probably about in the 5th grade. He died. I suppose had he lived, I would have probably gone to college. I think that's about all. But I graduated in 1941 from the school. And then I got married, and just before 1959, I guess it was in 1958, we had a superintendent by the name of Epperson, and he sent me a letter one day, and he said, "I would like for you and your wife to come to the school and be what we called in those days house parents." And Mr. Epperson, you see, really had in mind cottages to be built here, and he wanted my wife and I to come and take care of groups of students, you know, and just be with them and watch them as they grow and help them until they graduate. And that was Mr. Epperson's idea. And so I thought, well, gee, that sounds good. And so my wife and I accepted the jobs here, and we moved here to Vancouver in 1959 and worked as house parents for many years. She worked in McDonald, and I worked in Deer Hall. Until years later, my wife transferred over into a different area where I was at Deer Hall, and she worked on the second floor. And excuse me, I worked on the second floor, and she worked on the first floor. She had 24 boys, and I had 32 boys on the second floor, and there was only one house parent per floor. And then we'd go home in the mornings, and then the afternoons we'd come back. And it was never a problem. I was easy to manage the boys in those days. And in those days in the dorms, I started the Pee-wee basketball, and also a Pee-wee flag football. And we played softball with the boys, and started lots of activities. And as well, I encouraged hobbies for the boys. There was lots of things they could do, and Mr. Epperson was a very good superintendent, and he decided to make me dean of the boys at Deer Hall. And so I worked at Deer Hall until, oh, let me see, what year was it? I can't recall. But then they moved over to MacDonald Hall, and there was another Watson Hall that was torn down, and they transferred the boys to different buildings, and I was in one hall and my wife was in another. And then later I became dean of both buildings. It was a lot of work. And then sometime later, Archie Stack became superintendent of the school, and he said, "Harold, I think that's too much work for one man, so we better get another dean, have one in Deer Hall and one in MacDonald." And so I stayed there until I retired in 1982, and I was beginning to have some heart problems. I had to have a bypass surgery, and so at that time I had to leave my job, and it was very disappointing. But I really owe a lot to this school, Washington School for the Deaf, for the very, very happy life that I've had here. I'm very, very grateful to this school for my life and my career. When I retired back in 1982 because of health problems, sometime later, I believe it was in the summertime, I had to go in for a triple bypass procedure on my heart. And during my recovery, when I was feeling better, I began to get a little restless. I found that I just wasn't the kind of a person that could just sit back and let life pass me by. I had always been an active man from the time I was a little boy, all my entire life. And so I began to wonder, maybe I should do something. And I thought, well, I'd built a small shop, you know, it was right next to my mobile home, and it sat kind of to the side, and I just had things in there that I used for my own personal hobbies. And my wife decided about that time that, well, why don't we join a toll painting class? And I thought, well, that's a good idea. So off to toll painting class we went in Portland. And I began to paint, and my wife actually knew nothing about painting at all, but I had some experience in painting, and I was pretty good with handiwork, and I thought I was doing better than she was. And we were painting, I remember, it was January to about June, and the class finished, and then in the fall it started again. Now, during this particular time in the fall, there was a lot more women, and I kind of felt like a little uncomfortable. I was the only man there, and it was all women in this class. And before, when we first came and I was painting, you know, I would buy different things that I would paint. maybe, and sometimes I would make little things in my wood shop and bring them in and paint them. And the owner of this particular little toll painting class says, "Did you make that?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I made it." And she said, "Would you make one for me? And then maybe you can make some for the other people who are taking the class." And so I thought, well, I've got some tools, but they're really too small for, production work like she's wanting. And so I thought, well, I said, "Do you plan on having me do more work for you?" And so I thought, well, I'd get rid of the smaller equipment I have, and I'd buy more heavy-duty machinery that I could saw production things with, a drill press and all kinds of different things that I could produce these things for this toll painting class. And so that started me keeping busy, and I started being kind of a woodcutter. And I made all kinds of things, and I've been doing that since my retirement days until now. I'm still retired, but I'm still making all these things for this toll painting class. I'm beginning to be a little wobbly on my feet, but I'm still able to get out in the shop and do the work.